April 18, 1943, 9:34 a.m., 4,500 feet above the emerald jungles of Bougainville Island. Captain Thomas Lanfear's P-38 Lightning shuddered as he slammed the throttles forward, both Allison engines screaming in protest. Dead ahead, less than 1,000 yards away, a green Mitsubishi G4M Betty bomber banked desperately toward the treetops. 6 Zeros dove from above, their 20mm cannons already firing. Lanfear's wingman had peeled off to engage the escorts. He was alone. The Betty's rear gunner opened fire, tracers arcing past his canopy in bright red streaks that seemed to bend the air itself. Lanfear's hands were slick with sweat inside his leather gloves. His heart hammered against his ribs so hard it hurt. He'd been awake for 5 hours, flying for 3.5 of them, navigating across 435 miles of open ocean with nothing but a compass, a watch, and a prayer. His fuel gauge already showed he was at the point of no return. If this didn't work in the next 30 seconds, he'd never make it home. But none of that mattered now, because inside that Betty, according to the intelligence boys, was the man who had planned Pearl Harbor. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, Commander-in-Chief of the Combined Fleet, the architect of Japan's Pacific dominance, the one man whose death might change the entire course of the war. The Betty dropped lower. The Zeros closed in. Lanfear's gun sight settled on the bomber's wing route. And then, with his squadron 400 miles from friendly territory, his fuel running critically low, and 3 Japanese fighters seconds from bracket shots, Thomas Lanfear squeezed the trigger. 4 50 caliber machine guns and 1 20mm cannon erupted simultaneously. The Betty exploded. To understand why 16 American pilots had just flown the most audacious interception mission in aviation history, you need to understand what Admiral Yamamoto represented to the Japanese war machine, and why the United States was willing to risk everything to kill him. By April 1943, Isoroku Yamamoto wasn't just another admiral. He was the strategic genius behind Japan's entire Pacific offensive, the mastermind of Pearl Harbor, the architect of Japan's carrier doctrine, the man who had sunk the Prince of Wales and Repulse, who had driven MacArthur from the Philippines, who had seized Singapore and humiliated the British Empire. Japanese schoolchildren memorized his name. Radio Tokyo broadcast his movements to inspire the nation. To the Japanese people, Yamamoto was invincible, the embodiment of Bushido, the sword of the emperor himself. His very presence at the front lines raised morale across entire island chains. American intelligence officers had tracked Yamamoto's influence with growing alarm throughout 1942. After Midway, where he'd lost 4 carriers in a single day, Yamamoto had reorganized Japan's naval aviation into a leaner, more aggressive force. By early 1943, Japanese pilots were flying improved Zeros with better radios and tactics. Their kill ratios in the Solomons had actually improved despite material losses. When Yamamoto visited forward bases, combat reports showed Japanese fighter squadrons became noticeably more aggressive for weeks afterward. Admiral Chester Nimitz, Commander-in-Chief of the Pacific Fleet, kept a file on his desk labeled simply Y. Inside were intercepted Japanese communications, combat reports, strategic analyses. One memo from his intelligence staff concluded Yamamoto's death would be equivalent to losing 2 carrier divisions in terms of strategic impact. His understanding of American psychology and industrial capacity makes him uniquely dangerous. No other Japanese flag officer possesses his combination of tactical brilliance and strategic vision. The Americans had tried to kill Yamamoto before. Submarines stalked his flagship Yamato for months without success. High-altitude bombers attempted to hit his headquarters at Rabaul. The bombs fell into the jungle miles away. He was simply too well protected, too unpredictable, too careful. And then, on April 13, 1943, Station HYPO, the Navy's code-breaking unit at Pearl Harbor, intercepted a message that made Lieutenant Colonel Alva Laswell's hands shake as he decoded it. The message was addressed to multiple Japanese commands in the Solomon Islands. It detailed an inspection tour by the Commander-in-Chief. Departure time, 0600 from Rabaul. Arrival time, 0945 at Balale Airfield. Aircraft, 2 medium bombers. Fighter escort, 6 Zeros. The message even specified which bases Yamamoto would visit and how long he'd spend at each. Yamamoto's legendary punctuality, the same rigid precision that had launched the Pearl Harbor strike at exactly 0753 on December 7, 1941, had just given the Americans his exact location down to the minute. Laswell's decoded message reached Admiral Nimitz's desk within 4 hours. Nimitz stared at it for a long moment, then called for his air operations officer. "How far is Balale from Henderson Field?" 435 miles, sir. Maybe 450, depending on the intercept geometry. Nimitz was quiet. Henderson Field on Guadalcanal was the closest American airbase, but 435 miles was beyond the range of every fighter aircraft in the American inventory. The F-4F Wildcat could barely manage 300 miles. The F-4U Corsair topped out around 400 miles in perfect conditions. No single-engine fighter could reach Yamamoto and return. "What about the P-38s?" Nimitz asked. The P-38 Lightning was an oddity in 1943, a twin-engine, twin-boom fighter that looked like no other aircraft in the sky. Lockheed had designed it as a high-altitude interceptor with unprecedented range. 2 supercharged Allison engines gave it 175 horsepower. Counter-rotating propellers eliminated engine torque. A tricycle landing gear made it stable on the ground. And most crucially, with external drop tanks, it could fly nearly 1,000 miles. The Army Air Forces had exactly 18 P-38s operational at Henderson Field in April 1943. They belonged to the 339th Fighter Squadron, 347th Fighter Group. Most of their pilots had been in the Pacific less than 6 months. They'd flown patrol missions, bomber escorts, the occasional dogfight with Zeros over New Georgia. Standard missions ran 200 to 300 miles. None had attempted anything close to 900 miles round trip over open ocean. But it was the only aircraft that could physically reach Yamamoto. Nimitz composed a message to Secretary of the Navy Frank Knox requesting presidential authorization. The reply came back within 18 hours, routed through Admiral William Halsey, Commander South Pacific. "Attack approved. Proceed at your discretion." At Henderson Field, Major John Mitchell, commander of the 339th Fighter Squadron, received the orders on April 17th at 1600 hours. He read them twice, then called his pilots into the operations tent. "Gentlemen, tomorrow morning we're going to kill Admiral Yamamoto." The tent went silent. Someone whispered, "Holy shit." Mitchell spread a map across the table. "Intelligence says he'll be flying from Rabaul to Balale Airfield here." He tapped a tiny dot on the southern coast of Bougainville Island. "Departure 0600. Arrival 0945. We'll intercept here." Another tap, this time over the jungle inland from the coast. "At 0935, 10 minutes before he lands. That gives us a 10-minute intercept window." Captain Thomas Lanphier, tall, confident, a natural gunfighter, studied the map. "That's 435 miles, sir. We've never flown anything close to that distance." "I know. We'll carry 165-gallon drop tanks. That gives us roughly 1,000 miles total range, but there's zero margin for error. We'll fly at 50 feet the entire way to avoid radar detection. Navigation has to be perfect. We're flying over open ocean with no landmarks for 3 hours. If we miss the intercept point by even 5 miles, Yamamoto lands safely, and we probably don't have the fuel to make it home. Lieutenant Rex Barber, quieter than Lanfear, more methodical, asked the crucial question. What about zeros? Intelligence says 6 escorts. We'll have 16 P-38s. 4 will be the killer section. They go after the bombers. The other 12 fly high cover against the zeros. Speed is everything. We hit them, kill them, and get out before the zeros from Kahili can scramble. The whole engagement can't last more than 5 minutes, or we'll be swarmed. Mitchell assigned Captain Thomas Lanfear, Lieutenant Rex Barber, Lieutenant Jim McClanahan, and Lieutenant Joseph Moore as the killer section. Their sole mission: destroy both Betty bombers before they could land. The other 12 P-38s, led by Mitchell himself, would engage any zeros that tried to interfere. That night, none of the 16 pilots slept more than a few hours. Lanfear wrote a letter to his wife that he sealed and left with the squadron adjutant. Barber rechecked his ammunition load 3 times. Mitchell pored over navigation charts, calculating wind drift, magnetic variation, the curvature of the Earth over 435 miles. At 0400 on April 18th, ground crews topped off the P-38s with every drop of fuel they could hold. The 165-gallon drop tanks were bolted under each wing. Some pilots wrote messages on the tanks in chalk. For Yamamoto and Pearl Harbor payback. At 0705, Mitchell fired a green flare. 18 P-38 Lightnings roared down Henderson Field's coral runway in pairs, their twin engines thundering across the island. They climbed to exactly 50 feet above the ocean and turned northwest. For the next 3 hours and 20 minutes, the P-38s flew in near-perfect radio silence across an empty ocean. Mitchell navigated by dead reckoning, compass heading, airspeed, elapsed time, wind correction. No GPS, no radar, no landmarks except endless blue water. He had to calculate the intercept geometry perfectly. If Yamamoto departed Rabaul at 600, flying southeast at 180 meters/hour, and Mitchell's P-38s flew northwest at 200 meters/hour, where would their paths cross at exactly 0935? Mitchell had done the math 17 times. The answer was always the same, a point 35 miles inland from Bougainville's southwest coast, directly over the jungle. At 0920, the dark green mountains of Bougainville appeared on the horizon. Mitchell checked his watch. They were 3 minutes early. He throttled back slightly, letting the formation coast. The killer section, Lanfear, Barber, McClanahan, and Moore, dropped to 1,000 feet and spread out in a loose search pattern. Mitchell's 12 P-38s climbed to 18,000 feet, scanning for zeros. Lanfear's hands tightened on the control yoke. Had they missed him? Was the intelligence wrong? Had Yamamoto delayed? And then, at 0934, exactly 1 minute early, Lieutenant Doug Canning's voice crackled over the radio from the high cover. Bogies. 11 o'clock, low. There. 2 twin-engine bombers, green-painted, hugging the jungle canopy, and above them, 6 zeros in a loose V formation. Mitchell's voice, calm and cold. All right, Tom, he's yours. Get him. Before we continue, I'd love to know where you're watching from and what you knew about Operation Vengeance before today. Did you know the P-38 Beat Lightning pulled off the longest fighter interception in history? Drop a comment below and let me know. And if you're enjoying these deep dives into World War II's, Two's most incredible stories, hit that subscribe button. These scripts take serious research to get the technical and human details right, and knowing you're out there makes it all worthwhile. Captain Thomas Lanphier shoved both throttles to the firewall. The P-38 leaped forward, accelerating past 300 mph in seconds. Behind him, Rex Barber did the same. McClanahan and Moore angled toward the second bomber. The Japanese reaction was instant. The 6 Zeros broke formation and dove. The lead Betty, Yamamoto's aircraft, dropped even lower, so close to the treetops its prop wash kicked up leaves. The second Betty turned hard toward the coast. Lanphier had perhaps 45 seconds before the Zeros reached firing position. He pointed the nose slightly ahead of the bomber, leading it like a duck hunter. The Betty's rear gunner opened fire. Tracers snapped past Lanphier's canopy. Too close. Too close. His gun sight pipper settled on the bomber's right wing root. He squeezed the trigger. 450 caliber machine guns and one 20mm cannon fired in a single sustained burst. The recoil shuddered through the airframe. Lanphier saw his rounds walking up the Betty's fuselage, sparks, pieces of metal tearing away, a sudden gout of black smoke from the right engine. The Betty's wing exploded. The entire right side separated from the fuselage in a spray of fire and debris. The bomber snap-rolled left and plunged into the jungle at over 200 mm. A massive fireball erupted through the triple canopy rainforest. Black smoke boiled upward in a column visible for miles. Lanphier pulled up hard, 6 Gs slamming him into his seat. A Zero flashed past, guns firing, but the shot was rushed and high. Lanphier's vision tunneled from the G-forces. Blood pooled in his lower body. His anti-G suit squeezed his legs like a vice. He gasped against the oxygen mask. 300 yards away, Rex Barber had lined up on the second Betty. This bomber was running, full throttle, heading for the coastline and the safety of Kahili's fighter base. Barber closed to 500 yards, then 300, then point-blank range at 150 yards. He fired a 3-second burst. The Betty's left engine caught fire. The bomber staggered, trailing thick white smoke, coolant or hydraulic fluid. Barber fired again. The Betty's tail disintegrated. The bomber nosed over and slammed into the ocean half a mile offshore. It broke apart on impact, pieces of wreckage cartwheeling across the water. From intercept to destruction, 48 seconds. Above them, Mitchell's high cover was fully engaged. Zeros and P-38s wheeled in a massive turning fight at 15,000 feet. Lieutenant Besby Holmes shot down 1 Zero in a head-on pass. Lieutenant Raymond Hine damaged another. But the fight was spreading out, burning fuel, eating into their narrow margin for survival. Mitchell's voice cut through the radio chatter. Killer section, disengage. All aircraft, disengage. Head for home. The P-38s broke off simultaneously, diving toward the ocean at full throttle. The Zeros tried to follow, but the P-38's superior speed in a dive pulled them away. Within 90 seconds, the American fighters were racing south at wave-top height, the Zeros falling behind and finally turning back toward their bases. Mitchell checked his fuel gauge. They'd been over target for less than 4 minutes, but the combat maneuvering had consumed precious gallons. The flight home would be even tighter than the flight out. The 18 P-38s flew south in silence. 1 hour, 2 hours. The fuel needles dropped toward empty. Some pilots switched to reserve tanks with 20 minutes of flight time remaining. They couldn't radio Henderson Field. Radio silence was absolute in case Japanese forces were tracking them. At 13:26 hours, Nearly 6 hours after takeoff, 18 P-38 Lightnings appeared over Henderson Field. Several pilots landed with less than 50 gallons remaining. Lieutenant Moore's engines quit on the taxi strip. He'd flown 100 miles on vapors and will. In the debriefing tent, Lanfear and Barber both claimed the kill on Yamamoto's bomber. The dispute would continue for decades. Historians still argue about it today. But in that moment, it didn't matter. What mattered was the radio message Admiral Halsey sent to Admiral Nimitz at 14:30 hours. "Pop goes the weasel." It took the Japanese 3 days to find Yamamoto's body in the jungle. Search parties followed the smoke column to the crash site. The Betty had disintegrated on impact, scattering wreckage across 100 yards of rainforest. They found Yamamoto still strapped in his seat, thrown clear of the main fuselage. 2 .50-caliber rounds had hit him, one through the left shoulder, one through the lower jaw. The doctors who examined his body couldn't determine if he'd been killed by the gunfire or the crash. Either way, he died instantly. The Japanese Navy kept Yamamoto's death secret for 5 weeks. When they finally announced it on May 21st, the entire nation went into mourning. Radio broadcasts were suspended. Theaters closed. His state funeral in Tokyo drew over 2 million people. Emperor Hirohito awarded him the Order of the Chrysanthemum, the highest honor Japan could bestow. But the strategic impact was already reverberating through the Imperial Japanese Navy. Vice Admiral Mineichi Koga took command of the combined fleet. He was competent but cautious, none of Yamamoto's aggressive brilliance. Japanese naval operations in the Solomons became noticeably more conservative. The audacious carrier raids stopped. The bold flanking maneuvers disappeared. American intelligence officers monitoring Japanese radio traffic reported something else. Morale was collapsing. If the Americans could kill Yamamoto, the invincible Yamamoto, protected by Zeros and flying in secret, then no one was safe. Japanese pilots started refusing to fly with senior officers, fearing they'd be targeted. Admirals stopped visiting forward bases. The psychological impact rippled across the entire theater. The kill ratios told the story in numbers. In the 3 months before Yamamoto's death, Japanese pilots in the Solomons maintained a 1.81 kill ratio against American fighters. In the 3 months after, that ratio reversed to 1.2.1 in America's favor. Part of that was new American tactics, better aircraft, more experienced pilots. But part was something harder to quantify. The Japanese had lost their sense of invincibility. Captain Mitsugu Kofukuda, a Zero pilot who'd escorted Yamamoto on previous flights, wrote in his diary on May 23rd, "The Americans reached out 1,000 kilometers and killed our greatest admiral. They knew where he would be to the minute. They flew across an ocean to murder him. How can we fight such devils? How can we win when they break every rule of war, and heaven itself does not strike them down?" For the American pilots, the mission became legendary overnight. Lanfear and Barber were both awarded the Navy Cross, unusual for Army pilots, a sign of how important the Navy considered the kill. Mitchell received the Distinguished Service Cross. All 16 pilots were credited with 1/6 of an aerial victory for participating in the most important mission of the Pacific Air War. But the mission had cost them something too. The extreme range, the stress, the knowledge that they'd assassinated a specific individual rather than engaging in ordinary combat, it affected them differently than standard missions. Rex Barber, the methodical one, processed it like engineering. We had a mission. We executed it successfully. Yamamoto made war on us. He paid the price. He flew 108 more combat missions and survived the war. Thomas Lanphier struggled more. He gave dozens of interviews, wrote articles, dined with generals. But friends noticed he drank more after the war, talked about it obsessively, seemed haunted by something. In a 1960 interview, he said, "People ask if I feel guilty. I don't. But sometimes I wonder, if we'd killed Hitler instead of Yamamoto, would that have saved more lives or just prolonged the war? You kill one man to save thousands, but you still remember his face in your gun sight." Major John Mitchell, the navigator who'd made the impossible intercept work, refused to discuss the mission for 30 years. When he finally gave an interview in 1973, he said, "The planning was the hardest part. Flying 435 miles over open ocean with no landmarks, hitting a 10-minute intercept window, I still don't know how we didn't miss him. 5 miles east, 5 miles west. And Yamamoto lands safely. The margin between success and failure was that thin." Mitchell survived the war and retired as a colonel. He died in 1995, still receiving letters from history enthusiasts asking how he'd pulled off the navigation. His answer was always the same: mathematics, a good compass, and luck. The P-38 Lightning itself became forever associated with the mission. Lockheed used it in advertising. The plane that killed Yamamoto. Japanese propaganda warned pilots to watch for the fork-tailed devil. In the remaining 2 years of the Pacific War, P-38s shot down more Japanese aircraft than any other American fighter. Major Richard Bong scored 40 kills in a P-38. Major Thomas Maguire scored 38. The Lightning's range, firepower, and speed made it the perfect hunter over the vast Pacific distances. But nothing matched April 18, 1943. That mission, 18 aircraft, 900 miles, a 10-minute intercept window, and the death of Japan's greatest admiral, remained the single most audacious fighter interception in aviation history. The legacy echoes through modern warfare. The Yamamoto mission established the template for every precision strike that followed. The 1943 planners asked questions that military staffs still ask today. How do we reach a target beyond normal range? How do we navigate without landmarks? How do we time an intercept against a moving target? How do we balance the value of the target against the risk to our forces? The Israeli strike on Iraqi nuclear reactors in 1981, over 1,000 miles with F-16s on extended range. The raid on Osama bin Laden in 2011, helicopters flying 162 miles into Pakistan with precision timing. The parallels are obvious: long-range penetration, perfect navigation, timing measured in minutes, high-value individual targets. Modern Top Gun instructors teach the Yamamoto mission in their strategic planning courses. The lesson isn't about the shooting. That part was almost easy once they reached the target. The lesson is about the planning. Mitchell's navigation calculations, the fuel management, the risk assessment, the discipline to fly 3 hours in radio silence with no confirmation the target would even be there. At the National Air and Space Museum in Washington, D.C., a P-38 Lightning hangs in the World War II gallery. A small placard mentions Operation Vengeance. Tour guides tell visitors, "This is the aircraft type that killed Admiral Yamamoto." Children take photos. Veterans pause and remember. The plane itself looks almost delicate. Those twin booms, the sleek fuselage, the contra-rotating propellers. It doesn't look like a 1,000-mile assassin, but on April 18, 1943, it became exactly that. Isoroku Yamamoto had told his superiors before Pearl Harbor, "I can run wild for 6 months, maybe a year. After that, I can guarantee nothing." He'd been exactly right. Pearl Harbor was December 7, 1941. Yamamoto died April 18, 1943. 16 months. He'd run wild. He'd shocked the world. He'd seized an empire. And then, at 9:35 in the morning, over a jungle island 4,500 feet above the Pacific, a farm boy from San Diego, flying a twin-engine fighter, put 450 caliber rounds through his aircraft and ended the run. The Americans had reached across 435 miles of ocean, intercepted a 10-minute window, and killed the one man Japan could not afford to lose. They'd done it with mathematics, navigation, courage, and an ugly twin-boomed fighter that nobody expected could fly that far. Yamamoto had planned Pearl Harbor with meticulous precision, timing the attack to the minute. The Americans had returned the favor with interest. The student had learned from the master. And on a morning in April 1943, with the jungle burning and the Betty scattered across the trees, the lesson was complete. That's how 18 P-38 Lightnings flew 900 miles to kill an admiral. And that's how one mission changed the strategic calculus of an entire war, proving that in modern warfare, no one is beyond reach, no range is too far, and precision matters more than numbers. The age of strategic assassination had arrived, delivered by twin Allison engines, 450 caliber machine guns, and pilots willing to fly to the edge of their fuel and beyond.